seminar. So first of all, I want to give some information about our seminar series. As an economics and finance club, we start to make sector economies series, including oil, defense industry, and also renewable energy, and also other sectors, of course. So today, renewable energy economics seminar is the first event of the event series. Our sector economics event series. So Muzaffar Abasov is finance analyst at oil industry. Will provide us a lot of information, and also he will give the details about renewable energy. So the first of all, I would like, and also as a club, we would like to thank you for accepting our invitation. We really appreciated it. And so now Safa, she is also one of the responsible person for our social media accounts in our club. She will give a brief introduction about you and also seminar, like how's going our seminar. So now it's your turn, Safa.
Thank you, Murad. So welcome everyone. Today we are hosting Mr. Muzaffar Abasov. He got his bachelor degree in Azerbaijan State University of Economics, majoring in international economics, and he continued his education at the Middle East Technical University, Department of Economics, to get his master's. Then he started his professional career at the Ministry of Agriculture of Azerbaijan as an economic analyst. And then soon he left the job to move to the British Petroleum Company in Azerbaijan as a corporate finance analyst. So, Mr. Muzaffar, renewable energy is a sector that became one of the most hot topic in nowadays world agenda. So, how can we describe today's renewable energy sector in the world's economy, and what can we say about it during the economy, the COVID-19 pandemic, and what kind of investments are made in the sector by companies and governments, and which factors make the sector economically different from other sectors? So, Mr. Muzaffar, the floor is yours. And if you have any questions, guys, please put them in the chat box. Thank you.
Thank you, Safa. Thank you, and welcome to everyone. I'm happy to be here, and I wish we will try to learn more about the renewable energy sector and its from economic aspects in coming an hour or so. So just let me know when you will see my screen. Do you see?
Yeah, we see right now.
Okay, so the energy industry of the world is transitioning very fast. So, and the renewable energy types are the new favorite of the energy industry. So you may have heard many news, many discussions about that already, and continuously the media somehow tries to kind of emphasis that the world is changing and it is happening very fast. But today we'll see how it is happening and what are the impacts of it. What is the view about the future? So what is the view about the future of the energy, not only the renewable sector, but also overall energy industry? How it was now, how it is, and how it will continue to be in the future. So here is a brief list of the things I would like to talk to you about today. A brief history of the energy industry, the way the energy industry looks today, and how the future looks from the perspective of energy professionals. And I have used several references for that, and I have used some data from the companies already in the industry, so to see how the world, how the international organizations, how the experts on these topics see the future of the energy industry, and what can be its potential outcomes. This is a short list of references I've used in my materials, just to acknowledge. I have used some publicly available, and by the way, I provide the links here so that if it is possible to share the pack with you, you can refer to those links and get more information about the renewable energy sector and the history of energy, etc. So it is here. And by the way, the main sources I have used has been publicly available statistical data and energy outlook data from provided by BP and some other materials as well. There is one Wikipedia article as well. I understand Wikipedia is generally not considered as a legitimate kind of academic source, but just it is there as a source of information. Do not be afraid to use Wikipedia for getting information, but avoid using it as an academic reference. But as today we are not in an academic kind of class, I was kind of courageous enough to use Wikipedia. So here you can see a small chart showing some milestones in the history of energy for last 3 centuries. It is mainly focused on United Kingdom. It shows how the Industrial Revolution, when Industrial Revolution started, it started with coal. But as time passed, the coal became one of the most important energy source in the world, but then slightly started to be replaced by oil, by electricity, etc. And now UK is targeting to get its carbon emissions to net zero by 2050. So why I'm showing this to you? This, as a chart, it will not give you much information. It is just some historical milestones that energy industry has went through. But my point is that the transition is not something new. So it is not that the energy industry has been the same for 2,000 or 3,000 years, and now it started to transition. No, energy industry was in the transition since the beginning of the humankind. So the first source of energy has been sunlight for us, and people used wood to make fire and to get warm. So it has been the most basic energy sources that we have been using maybe 1 million years ago, 300,000 years ago. And by 18th century, we already started to have a more focus on the kind of energy sources that we can harvest from the, let's say, fields and start using it for our, like the sources that needed refinery before using. And the 18th century was the start of the coal era. And by 20th century, it was leaving its peak by the early 20th century, but then it somehow being replaced by oil and gas. And now oil is the most used energy source in the industry, but now we are moving towards the clean energy. So we are in a continuous transition. The transition has always been here, but now the transition is getting in a faster phase when compared to last few decades. So that is why we are hearing more and more about the renewable energy, alternative energy, etc. So before starting to go into the forecast, before going into the numbers, etc., let's first understand what we call renewable energy and what we don't. So there are 2 main sources of energy that we are using. First of them is finite energy sources. These include coal, oil, natural gas, uranium, and some other sources that we harvest and refine before using. But the renewable energy sources are those that are being refreshed by time, which are sun, wind, rain, waves. The more we use them, they will not become abundant. So these are those kind of resources. So just a question to you. We all know that this coal, oil, natural gas, etc., all are being kind of created within the earth naturally. We didn't create them, and they are not fixed. They are being created continuously again. Why do we call them finite while we call others infinite or renewable? What do you think? Any views? Come on, guys.
Can you repeat the question, please? Because
so the finite energy sources that we call oil, natural gas, coal, etc., all are being created within the earth by the nature. And it is a continuous process. It is not something new. The oil that we are taking now from the fields has been kind of being prepared by the nature for, let's say, some years now. So all of them are natural, and all of them are being continuously created by the nature. So why do we call them finite? Why do we call them non-renewable?
Because it took a long time to create them.
Yes, exactly. So the important thing here for something being renewable is that is it renewable within the human time scale? So currently the consumption rate of the finite energy sources is significantly faster than its recreation rate. So maybe if we stop a million years, do not use any oil, coal, natural gas, etc., after a million years, we will have plenty of new resources. But we can't wait a million years because the maximum a person can live is up to 100 years or so. So we are trying to use resources that are being refreshed within human time scale, within a few years or 10 years or so. That's why we call them renewable. That's why we call them kind of non-finite energy sources. Let's move. So here are two simple charts which show, the first one shows the share of the, in absolute terms, the world consumption of primary energy. As you can see, the main source of energy in the world is oil, the large green bar below. But the second place is coal. So does it tell you anything? As I said, around 70 years ago, the leadership of the coal was left behind, and oil and gas started to grow faster and faster, and became the most important used energy source. But the coal is already is still in the second place. Does that tell you something? Can you interpret it somehow?
so actually, as far as I know, that after the industrial revolution, coal is growing up and up because it's more useful for that period. But right now, we can make a lot of things by oil, and we can use oil and other stuffs in different fields of the our, for example, our life. So I think that that's the main reason that oil and gas it's growing up more and more faster compared to the coal.
Yeah, but the coal is still in the second place, even if it is not growing that much. It is still in the second place. It still takes a significant part of the world energy. So what it means for me personally, even if the renewable energy grows faster and faster and becomes maybe becomes the first place, it doesn't mean that oil, gas, and coal will disappear. We will still be continuing using them up to a limit. And overall, even if you look at this chart shows a time scale between 1994 to 2019. And you can see the trend that coal still continues to grow. That's something interesting to consider, because we say that coal is a dirty type of energy. It is probably the dirtiest of the energy types, but we still increase the consumption of that, even if the relative share declines. The second chart shows the percentage share of each. So here you can see coal has been declining for at least, has been losing market share for at least last 5 or 7 years. Even if it declines in terms of the percentage share, it still continues to grow in the absolute terms. Because the world population continues to grow, the companies continue to grow, country GDPs, economies continue to grow. So we don't have enough energy to feed all of that. So oil and gas and renewable energy is still not sufficient to feed the whole industry. So what we can do is to continue using coal. But we are trying to reduce that. The world tries to reduce that, but it is still not possible, and will probably not be possible at least for coming 10 or 20 years to completely get rid of the coal. So the same applies to oil and gas as well. Even if the renewable energy continues very fast, as you can see in this graph, the renewables, the bottom one, grows very fast, but we will still continue using traditional energy sources as well. Okay. So as can be seen here, the oil is the most important one again, coal in the second place, and natural gas follows that. And by the way, it doesn't mean that these energy sources are being directly used. Part of its usage is it is first being converted to electricity energy, then being used in the industry. So part of this consumption is electricity, and part of that is direct use of these resources. Okay. As I said before, the renewable sector is growing very fast when compared to other types of energy. And there are certain regions in the world that drive this increase. So in this chart, you can see that around 20 years ago, in all areas of the world, there were very minor usage of very minor consumption of the renewable energy. But now the picture is significantly different. You can see that the North American countries, Europe, and Asian Pacific countries, which is mainly driven by China, use significant amount of renewable energy. They continue growing it year by year. But as you can see, the CIS countries, do you know what is CIS? It is Commonwealth of Independent States. It is the post-Soviet countries, the countries that became independent after the collapse of Soviet Union. So those are called CIS. And the Middle East countries use very small, negligible amount of renewable resources. Why do you think it is happening like that? Why Middle Eastern and CIS countries do not use enough renewable energy resources?
I think because they are.
Sorry?
Is it because they are undeveloped?
Yeah, maybe that is one reason.
Is it because it's relatively very expensive for them?
Yes, maybe, considering the fact that CIS and Middle Eastern countries are generally less developed, as Safa said, they don't have enough technology to develop kind of new ways of generating energy. That is right. What can be another reason?
Their access to oil or other energy sources, like more than the other countries.
Yes, and it is a third reason. So,
as Aisha said that, for example, of also the post-Soviet Union countries and also Middle Eastern countries, which more Arab countries, like they have oil production already, so it's more better than use oil compared to the renewable energy. At least you have oil; it's more cheaper.
Yes, yes. So all three reasons that you have mentioned are all correct. The first one is that they are undeveloped. What it leads to? It leads first to that, like the community doesn't really want renewable energy. People in underdeveloped countries generally do not care about clean energy and about the future of the energy industry, etc. They don't have that kind of interest. But in developed countries, in Europe, in United States, North America, etc., the countries, the population of the countries really want demand clean energy from their governments and companies. Even, let me give an example to you. In the United States, you can voluntarily purchase electricity that is generated from renewable sources, but you will pay more, and people go for it. People pay more to get clean energy rather than the energy generated by oil or gas or other resources. And the second reason, as mentioned, they are access to the technology. Those countries have less access to the technology when compared to the more developed countries. And the third reason, they already have enough oil and gas reserves that they actually don't need renewable energy currently. But after a few years, of course, they will start understanding that, okay, this oil prices will start declining, gas prices will start declining, and renewable will be more the demand will increase for renewable energy, etc. And they will also have to switch to the new world kind of order, let's say. And among renewable energy types, the solar and wind energy is the most popular ones. Actually, wind is the most popular and solar is a runner-up. And actually, when we talk about renewable energy sources, we generally do not mention hydro resources. And as let me come to that later. Okay. So these other types and these things do not include the hydroelectric, but it is also a renewable energy. But these graphs, these statistics, etc., do not include that into the renewable types of energy because it is more of a traditional type of energy than a newly growing industry. Okay. Here again is a chart showing the. Any questions? I think I heard something. Was it just? No? Okay. So showing a split of the energy types between countries, between regions, actually, not countries. Few things to observe here. The Asia Pacific, you can see the coal is actually in the first place there. Even like, by the way, this is not the total use of energy. It is only the energy used to generate electricity. Here we are not talking about the whole total energy use. We are only, in this chart specifically, we are only talking about the energy used to generate electricity. As China uses a lot of coal to generate electricity, in Asian countries, the coal is in the first place in generation of electricity. But as you can see, in Central and Southern America, actually the first place is hydroelectricity. It is actually a renewable type of energy, but it is shown here separately. Why do you think in Central and Southern America, the hydroelectricity is in the first place? Because they have most probably more hydro resources than anyone else. So the most important being the Amazon River in the South America. So they use lots of like hydroelectric stations to generate electricity. But in the more developed countries in Europe, America, etc., the proportion of the, as we mentioned before, proportion of the renewable energy in generating electricity is also high, but they still continue like using a significant amount of fossil finite source of energy types to generate electricity. Okay. So we already talked about how the energy industry looks today. All we told previously was something that was kind of the current snapshot of the world energy. But now we will talk more about the future. How do we see the future of energy? So the estimations show that currently the share of renewable energy is around 5% in the world, but it will go up to from 20% to 60% by 2050, depending on how the world reacts to the transition, how the world implements the transition. If it will be the way it is today, we continue doing business the way we do today, then the proportion of renewable energy by 2050 is estimated to be around 22%. But if we put more effort and try to make things happen as fast as possible, then by 2050 we can end up using 60% renewable energy in the industry and countries, etc. It includes all type of things, electricity and kind of energy used in industry, energy used to fuel cars, energy used to warm up houses, etc. It considers everything. And the share of the fossil fuels, which is currently 85%, will go significantly down depending on how we approach these things again. If we will put more emphasis on the renewable energy, then it can go as low as 20%, but it can still be as high as 70% depending on how we react to the changes. And overall, around on average 40% of the electricity will be generated by the renewable types of energy. So if we add the hydro energy on top of that, we can say that around 60% of the world electricity will come from clean sources of energy. But overall, the key expectations is that global energy demand will still continue to grow because the countries are growing, as I mentioned before, the economies are becoming more advanced and population is growing. So the energy growth will still continue to grow. But the share of the renewables in any case will increase. It is unavoidable. We cannot avoid that, as simple as that. That will happen sooner or later. The renewables will take a significant part in the energy mix. And the world will continue to get more electricity in the industry to be used than today. What it includes, first, the electricity cars, the cars that will be fueled by electricity. And second, it is more efficient to generate, even if it is oil, natural gas, coal, etc., to first generate electricity and then use it for fueling the industry. Because it is easier to keep to store the electricity. You can store that in any place, and it is more efficient. Like the engines that work with electricity generally are more efficient when compared to the engines that directly work with oil and coal, etc. Okay. And here is a more detailed chart showing what is the forecast for the fossil fuels and renewables, the numbers that I have shown in the previous slide. So if there are three scenarios that is possible, the business as usual, then as discussed, the share of the renewable energy will be relatively low, but still significantly higher than today. The second scenario is rapid, if the things happen a bit faster than it is today. And the third scenario is net zero. What does net zero mean? So the companies are trying to reduce the emission they are throwing into the atmosphere of the Earth. So when you produce oil, gas, coal, etc., the fossil fuels, we throw significant amounts of carbon dioxide, in other words, carbon emission into the atmosphere of the world, of the Earth. So we need to reduce that, otherwise we will cause significant unrecoverable damage to the nature, to the environment. So companies try to reduce that emission, and it is not always possible to kind of directly reduce the emission, because to reduce the emission, there are several ways, and the most effective way of that is just to stop producing. But we cannot stop producing right away, because the world needs energy. All of us need energy. We need our cars to go, and we need our companies to work. So we cannot just stop production. But instead, what we can do is to offset that emission that we are doing into the atmosphere. And the ways to offset that is either to kind of use natural methods like growing trees, establishing forests that will reduce the carbon in the atmosphere, or to physically catch the carbon from the atmosphere and store it somewhere permanently. So these are two main ways that are used to reduce, to offset the emission. And when at the point that the emission you produce will be equal to the emission you reduce, then you are called at a point to be net zero. So you are not in absolute zero, you are still throwing some emission into the air, but you are offsetting that by something else. So you will be net zero. So this net zero will be something you will be hearing more and more as in the coming years, because I will come to that, but many companies, many international corporations in the world has already announced their targets to reach net zero emissions, okay? And as you can see, by that, if we implement this net zero scenario, the net zero targets, then by 2050, there will be very low net carbon emission into the atmosphere. So we will be living in a more clean, more kind of environmental friendly world by 2050, if we do the right thing to do, if we continue to reduce that emission. Otherwise, we might kind of end up having the same amount of emissions into the atmosphere, and international organizations already warn that the global warming is coming to significantly dangerous levels, and we need to avoid that. So we should make sure that we are following either the rapid or net zero scenarios, not the business as usual. And based on the structure of the energy, based on what will happen, taking the middle case, we can see here a dynamic of the forecast of energy use. As you can see, in the beginning of last century, coal was the king, but by the mid of the century, oil replaced it and became the #1. But by 2035, it is estimated that renewable energy will be in the first place in the mix of world energy usage. So that will happen in case the things doesn't go wrong. In 15 years, we will be living in a different world, and the things will be much different than today in terms of the energy. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about the impact of COVID-19 into how the renewable energy sector will shape. COVID-19 definitely kind of increased the need for transitioning faster, because oil companies got significant hit in the COVID-19 pandemic. As you saw, if you were tracking it, the oil price even went negative. So oil price was negative by April or May, I guess. So that was some significant alert for the oil companies. It was saying that, okay, it is time to move away from oil and to balance your investments to a more safer source of energy. By now, my understanding is that the safest investment out of the energy types is natural gas. You can ask why? Because it is not a renewable type of energy, but it is not as dirty as oil and coal. It is the cleanest, one of the most clean, let's say, fossil fuels that exist. So for companies, currently the natural gas is the safest, let's say, investment, but they already started to move away from oil, increase the natural gas a little bit, but put more effort to increasing the renewable energy into their portfolio. So as you can see here, the difference between the share of energy types, depending on the scenario, is the most stable in the natural gas. So whatever happens, the natural gas will still play an important role in our energy industry. So the countries that have significant amount of natural gas are lucky in this sense. Russia, Turkmenistan, Qatar, etc. All are lucky in this sense because natural gas will be kind of the most required fossil fuel after 30 years. But the estimations for the renewable and non-fossil and oil is a little bit, and even for coal is a little bit unclear. It can go either way. So after 50 years, we may end up to having oil still as the king, but we may end up having the renewable energy as the king as well. So we are not quite sure on that. We are still unclear on that, but natural gas will still be in demand, whatever happens. So a natural question that comes to people's mind is that if we need transition, if we need to move away from oil and gas, why don't we do just in a day? So in a year or 2 years, why it will take 30 years? So why don't we just stop producing the whole things, fuel, and just move to the renewable energy? There are several reasons for that, and most of them are economic reasons. First of all, the companies already have established infrastructure and investment. Imagine 5 years ago, you have spent few billions of dollars building an oil well, and now someone comes and says that, okay, you need to stop this and move to, let's say, producing wind energy. So that doesn't work. You can't do that. There are oil fields built already, gas fields. There are pipelines established to transport that oil and gas. There are refineries that work with oil and gas. And there are millions and billions of cars and machinery in the plants that work with oil and gas or coal. So let's say in my country, in Azerbaijan, there are around probably 3 million cars, and most probably less than 0.1% of those cars are working with electricity. Most of them are working with either oil, like gasoline, or diesel or something like that. That comes, all of them are coming from fossil fuels. So you cannot replace whole market with renewable friendly machinery. You cannot replace everyone's cars in a year or two. In my country, in the capital of my country, people still drive cars that has been produced 50 years ago. So you can, by estimating that, you can think that at least 30 years from now or 50 years from now, there will still be cars that are being used, that are being fueled by oil and other types of energy in the market. So it is not easy to do it in a day or two or a year or two. So it will happen sometime, but not today. And the demand is not there yet. So as I mentioned before, in the United States and in some other developed countries where people start to care more and more about the environment, people are willing to pay more to get cleaner energy, even if it is not a rational behavior from economic perspective. So in the first classes of the microeconomics classes in our bachelor studies, always lecturers tell us that an economic player, a subject in the economics, should be rational in its behavior. But people generally are not rational. So even if it is worse for them in terms of financials, they still are willing to pay more to get clean energy, to protect the environment, and to kind of bring the world in a better, to make the world a better place for everyone. But this trend is only applicable to few people in few countries. So most of the world doesn't really care about the clean energy, the population, I mean. So the demand is not there yet. People do not differentiate between the energy that are coming from clean or non-clean types. And the third reason is high cost of transition. The renewable energy sources are not as efficient as we would like to be today. So the wind stations, the solar panels, etc., they are all good, but they are expensive. So today, for an investor that wants to see the coming 10 years, oil and gas is still a better investment because it will pay back in a short period of time. It is cheaper relatively, etc. But for those who want to see like next 50 years as their investment period, the alternative energy can be a good idea, but it is still expensive, very expensive. And that's why not all companies have enough resources to invest in renewable energy. Okay.
It's not easy to tell people to buy a Tesla while they cannot, provide their daily life.
Yes. In my country, actually, when I wanted to purchase a car, I had very limited resources for that. And there was almost no electric car in the market within my budget, but there were thousands of cars within my budget that worked with oil-related, the fuels that are produced from oil. So how can I go and purchase Tesla or something like that, or electrical vehicles of Mercedes? And you actually pointed a good thing there. So the electric cars has been started to be produced just like, let's say, during last 10 years or so. So most people that are purchasing cars that go to the second-hand market do not have access to that cars because they generally, in most countries, especially in developing countries, prefer to buy cars that are much older so that they can afford. But the electric cars are relatively new and relatively expensive. That's why it is not easy to buy. And another point is that there are not enough infrastructure to charge the electric vehicles in the charging stations. That is something to consider as well. If I go and buy electric car, then I need to find some place to charge my car, just like my telephone, just like my smartphone. I charge it overnight using my house electricity. That will also cost money. So it is not efficient. It is not, the demand is not there yet again.
Exactly. This is the difference. In the US, for example, they have this infrastructure. They have the stations for charging.
Yes. And they have the money to buy that cars.
Exactly. Many people purchasing the Teslas or.
Yes, exactly. So once the electric cars and hybrid cars become more affordable, other countries will also gradually move to that as well, but not today. Okay, so this transition doesn't happen on its own. We are doing that as people, countries are doing that, companies are doing that. But how do they do it? The most frequent method for countries to support the transition is that they put mandatory renewable energy targets for their countries. For example, European Union has its target to increase their share of renewable energy from 25% today to 35% in 10 years. Like China has a target to increase its renewable energy usage from 12%. It has been set in 2015. The target was to increase it 12% in 2015 to 35% in 15 years. And the most significant target that I have seen has been from Kazakhstan. They're currently using 5% renewable energy in their energy mix, but they target to make it 50% by 2050. I'm not sure how realistic is this, but if they do this, that will be a significant improvement for their country, and that will probably allow the CIS to be visible in the renewable charts sometime in the near future. And how producers react? The most impacted parties from this change is the producers of fossil fuels. So these companies, the big oil and gas companies, they are producing an oil and gas, they are earning money, but the population, the environmentalists, the countries tell them, okay, you need to stop this and produce, let's say, renewable energy types. This will simply not work. You cannot force those companies to that. But those companies themselves understand that the future will be different. So living in today's standards will lead them to disappear from the market. So that's why they are putting targets for themselves. They are putting net zero targets. I have already explained what is net zero. It doesn't mean that you will not be producing any emissions. It means that you will produce some emissions, but you will also offset it by something else. So you will be net zero in terms of any emissions. So all major oil companies, most of them at least, have 2050 as their net zero target. It includes BP, Shell, Total, Equinor. These are major players in the oil market. And they have already set this target. And they are not doing it to bring us a better world. Definitely. They are not doing it for charity purposes. They are not doing it to protect the environment. All of them are doing this to protect their business. So it is all about business. But by doing so, they are doing something good for the world, for the environment, for us as well. So the target is not to create a better world, but the result will be a better world. And they are doing it by setting these type of targets. And it's not only the targets about net zero. So to reach this net zero, they are already reshaping their investment portfolios. They are divesting from oil and gas sector. They are selling their assets, and they are putting more and more investment into the renewable energy. They are purchasing small alternative energy companies. They are building new energy companies to produce alternative energy, and they are starting to cooperate with countries, with states, to help them reach their renewable energy targets. So these all are happening simultaneously. And on the other hand, on the other side of the thing is the consumers. They have their net zero targets as well. Let's say for Apple half a year ago announced its net zero target to reach net zero by 2030. It means that the emission that Apple is currently producing in its factories will be offset by the same amount of emission reduction by 2030. Same applies to other significantly large international corporations as well: British Airways, Microsoft, Unilever, Qatar Airways, Coca-Cola, etc., etc. So there are hundreds of companies that either explicitly or implicitly has set targets for them to reach net zero emissions by a certain date. And generally, the upper limit of that is 2050. And another players in the consumer market are electric car producers. Then most known of that is Tesla. They are currently the highest value car producer in the world. And that is not a coincidence. It is because they are producing electric cars and they are doing it better than everyone else.
Best electric car. The best electric car.
So currently, Tesla is the best electric car producer, and it has been one of the first to enter the market. That's why they are using its advantage as well. So their share in the US market and other developed markets grows very fast. So, and other car producers see this as well. They understand that if they continue producing, let's say, traditional cars, Tesla will come up and eat all of their market share, and they will not be able to sell any, let's say, cars in 30 years or so. And these companies, by the way, do not work, these international corporations do not have plans for 1 year or 3 years or 5 years. If it was a small, let's say, entrepreneur working in a small town, then they wouldn't care much about 50 years later. But these corporations must care about a longer time frame. They need to understand what's going to happen in 50 years, in 30 years, and they need to act based on that. And again, the purpose here is not to follow the trends or to move to create a better world. The sole purpose here is to increase the shareholder value, to increase the value of their shareholders. In the exact day that a company would announce that I will start producing electric cars, their share price will go up, definitely. Because market will start thinking more positively about them and people will purchase more and more stock of those companies and their shareholder value will increase. Again, it is all business. There is no charity here. Volkswagen and Volvo, these kind of companies already announced that by certain date, they will stop producing non-electric vehicles. They'll produce only electric vehicles. And other companies such as Mercedes, BMW, Hyundai, Toyota, etc., they are increasing the number of electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles in their portfolio. So it will happen sooner or later, in 20 years or in 30 years. The majority of the cars in the market will be electric cars. And why it happens? Actually, we talked a lot about that, but why we are going through this transition? Wouldn't just we stop and start thinking about the renewable energies after 10 years or 20 years? First one is that fossil fuels are getting scarce. Again, the current reserves that we have and the reproduction rate of fossil fuels is much lower than the consumption rate. So it means that after 30 or 50 years, the world will no longer have fossil fuel reserves unless we replace it with something or we kind of invent new oil fields or gas fields, etc. So this scarcity creates fear in the companies and businesses, countries, etc. That's why we are moving away from those resources. And consumers and shareholders care more about the environment more than ever. So as we discussed previously, the consumers of energy in developed countries already are moving away from fossil fuels and they are moving more to the cleaner energy. And there are more and more organizations that start to care about the environment. They are putting pressure on the non-environmental friendly companies. That's why they don't want to take that pressure and lose their share prices, their profits, etc. And one of the most important things, considering the above, if the transition is going to happen sooner or later, why not to drive that? So if an oil company today just thinks that, okay, sooner or later it will happen and I will take actions once it happens, it will not work for them. You will either be the driver of this change or you will disappear from the market. Because new companies, new competitors will also come to the market. You will not be able to compete with them because you are like too much focused on your traditional business. So it is better to start earlier than late in this industry. It is better for oil companies to lose some investment today rather than staying 5 or 10 years and then losing all of their business. So these are the reasons why this transition will happen. I think that was all from my side. I'm open to any type of questions as far as I can answer. And I think the organizers will be able to share this pack with you. The original pack that I have shared with the organizers actually didn't include that reference page. That's why I will reshare it with them so that you can have access to the references as well in case you need more information and you want to read and watch some videos about the renewable energy industry. That's it.
Thank you so much, Mr. Muzaffar. So actually, we made a form, like application form, and we put there the question section. So there are some questions that someone asked already. So if it's okay for you, we can ask that questions. I mean, Safa will ask to you.
Okay, sure.
So go on, Safa.
Yes. Okay, the first question was, what are the effects of renewable energy on environmental problems? I mean, what is the future of environmental problems when it comes to renewable energy use?
As I mentioned, the effect of fossil fuel consumption and production on the environment is getting worse and worse. We are very close to the warning level, to the red point in terms of global warming. The climate change is getting worse and worse. And if we continue doing the business like this, after 50 years or 100 years, the world will be a much worse place to live and to do business. That's why moving to the renewable energy, alternative energy sources, because they don't have any negative impact into the world, into the environment, will significantly reduce our impact into the environment and will allow us to protect the environment, to protect the nature. Let's say the solar panels, they can work everywhere and they don't have any negative impact into the environment. So they are becoming more and more common in the world. And wind stations, wind turbines, they work without any negative impact into the environment. So, or at least negligible impact into the environment. So replacing the fossil fuels with renewable type of energy will significantly make the environment better. Okay.
Yeah. And someone actually asked, and we already answered the question, I think, during the presentation, is about the electric energy productions, the electric cars, and how it's going to affect the oil industry. And I guess you already spoke about this,
Yeah.
and it's a very interesting topic. I mean, especially now the rise of the Tesla and having now.
Just to add a few things to that, as I mentioned previously, it is not going to happen in a day. And the overall estimations is that at least for the next 15 years, the demand to oil will continue growing. Even if by the percentage share it will decline, the demand to the oil will grow, and it will not be driven from the air. It will be driven by the cars, by the factories, companies, etc. So, but it will happen sooner or later, and the electric car industry will significantly damage the oil industry. That is something we cannot avoid. So it is better to move away from that sooner rather than waiting that, okay, after 15 years, I can start thinking about that.
Actually, I have personally a question. Do you think that some countries that are moving to renewable resources and renewable energy is kind of a promotion to themselves, like to the country itself? It's some kind of a fancy way.
Not exactly. I wouldn't say countries. Companies fall in this category more, because companies are not doing things for profit generally, but they can still use to kind of, some governments, the government representatives can use this as a promotion tool for themselves in order to be elected, maybe to get the majority in the parliament, etc. So that people will think that, okay, this party is environmentalist, so I will choose them, etc. That is one thing. But for companies understand that giving messages to the investors, to the public about their future plans, about the renewable energy will increase their market, like the market value and share price. That's why they use this as a tool as well. So it doesn't mean that all of the companies who promised that we will be doing these kind of things will do that exactly at the time they have promised. But the reality is that the investors are not kind of dumb as well. So they will see that in a year or two, whether the companies follow their promises or not. And more importantly, if they do not follow this route, sooner or later, they will have to disappear from the market. So that is right that some companies, actually many companies, use these type of things as a tool. And same applies to the artificial intelligence as well. So you can hear today all companies in the world claim that they are using artificial intelligence in their operations, but only few of them actually do. It is actually a little bit off topic, but I want to say that this, in Germany, there was a multinational corporation called Wirecard. It was promoting itself as the most innovative company of Europe. And they were claiming that they are using artificial intelligence in all aspects of their business. And they were claiming to have trillions of dollars in their bank accounts, etc. But at the end, it appeared, sorry, millions of dollars. At the end, it appeared that they didn't have any money. They were falsely claiming that. Also, they were doing all of their business in Excel spreadsheets with manual input, no artificial intelligence, nothing like that. So the same applies to the renewable energy as well. Many companies claim that they are doing things to reduce the emissions, etc., but not all of them are doing that.
Wow, interesting, actually. So if anyone has any question, I mean, the floor is yours, guys.
No one has a question, guys?
Don't be shy.
Okay, then.
Okay. Okay, then if you haven't any question, again, Mr. Muzaffar, thank you so much for spending your time with us today. And actually, for me, as a personal say, it's really, it was really good somehow seminar for me, because I also somehow interested in that area, and it was really good for me. I hope the other guys also benefit. Of course, they benefit from that seminar. And as members of the board of our club, we would like thank you again for coming here today.
Thank you for inviting me, and it was a pleasure for me to be with you and to talk to you. So thank you, and you can contact me anytime in the future if you have any questions, or in case I can help you in anything related, maybe questions related to the energy industry or so. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hocam. See you.
Thanks again.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Have a good night.
Thank you again.